Hello, and welcome to COPE Northern Sonoma County's first webinar for 2023. I am Diana Borges, one of the COPE board members. Our webinar today will focus on flood preparedness and flood risks in Sonoma County. Our speakers will be Sage Limpp and Dr. Nancy Brown of Sonoma County Department of Emergency Management and Misti Wood from our Sheriff's Office. After their presentations, we will be answering questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. And for those of you who may not know where the chat is, if you take down at the bottom is the chat icon, you click on that, and then over to the right is the pop-up where you can type your questions in down at the bottom. I will now turn this over to Sage, who will talk about risks in our county. Welcome, Sage.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Sage Limpp, and I am a Deputy Emergency Services Coordinator with Sonoma County's Department of Emergency Management. I'm going to talk about flooding here in Sonoma County, including a bit of background and history and the impact and risk that we face here due to flooding. So floods are the most frequent natural hazard that impacts Sonoma County, and flooding also causes the greatest amount of property losses, as well as it's accounted for the highest number of local, gubernatorial, and presidential disaster declarations. Our Sonoma County Emergency Operations Center has been activated 11 times due to flood-related local emergencies since 1995. So a flood occurs when the existing stream channels cannot contain excess runoff from rainfall, resulting in overflow onto adjacent lands. And flooding can result from storm surges, excessive rainfall, tsunamis, dam failure, and sea level rise. And here specifically in the Russian River, drought conditions can also cause isolated flooding in the estuary of the Russian River due to excess sand disposition at the bar, which then blocks the path to the Pacific Ocean. A floodplain is that area that's adjacent to a watercourse or other body of water that's subject to the reoccurring inundation of floods. And floods on small streams typically will peak and recede quite quickly, while floods, for example, on the lower Russian River may not peak for 2 days or more after the start of a storm and may exceed flood stage for 4 days or more after a storm event. Across Sonoma County, damaging floods occur most frequently along the Russian River and the tributaries in its watershed. The Russian River watershed, as you can see in this map here, is the largest in Sonoma County, draining a total of 1,485 square miles. And nearly 90% of that drainage basin lies upstream of the lower Russian River. Floods in Sonoma County typically are going to occur in the winter months. They're going to develop within 24 to 48 hours after a storm event and will recede within 3 days after the end of a storm. So to give a bit of background, the United States Geological Survey has maintained stream gauge stations to record floods on the Russian River since 1911. And since 1955, gauges have indicated that flood stage was exceeded at the Guerneville gauge 35 out of 64 years. So more than 50% of the time we're reaching that flood stage in any given year. Historically, the earliest major flood recorded on the river occurred in 1862, and this flood had an estimated discharge of 100,000 cubic feet per second, and that's considered a 1% chance flood event. And a 1% chance flood event means there's a 1% chance in that given year that a flood could occur. So following several floods in the 1930s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decided that 2 dams were necessary to control flood flows. Coyote Valley Dam, which holds back the East Fork of the Russian River and created Lake Mendocino, was constructed in the late 1950s, and Warm Springs Dam was constructed in the 1980s to hold back Dry Creek and create Lake Sonoma. These facilities have a combined drainage area of 235 square miles, and they artificially augment low summer flows, as well as diminished peak winter flows. And these facilities have been credited with reducing floodwaters. For example, they were credited with reducing floodwaters by 4 feet in the Guerneville area during the February 1986 storm. And additionally, Warm Springs Dam has significantly reduced the risk posed by that 1% chance flood downstream of the dam on Dry Creek. Floods along the Russian River are also weakened by the Laguna de Santa Rosa. So this complex of wetlands, which is a natural waterway and overflow basin of Marquess Creek, contains flows from approximately 10% of that Russian River watershed. So during floods, the Laguna acts as that natural reservoir and can store an immense amount of water, which then reduces that river's downstream flood levels by upwards of 10 feet. Now, in recent years, this has changed due to increased sedimentation, as well as more development in the Laguna area. So that's decreased its capacity to absorb as much water. Generally speaking, once the groundwater has been recharged and it's saturated by prior storms, and there's a prediction of significant rainfall, the risk of potential flooding greatly increases. So the new predictive ability to identify what they call atmospheric river conditions may also increase the accuracy in determining possible flood events. So what is an atmospheric river? This term has become much more common in recent years, and atmospheric rivers are relatively long, narrow regions in the atmosphere that are like rivers in the sky that transport most of the water vapor outside of the tropics. So these columns of vapor move with the weather. They carry an amount of water vapor that's roughly the equivalent to the average flow of water at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And when they make landfall, they often release this water vapor in the form of rain or snow. Although atmospheric rivers can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, those that contain the largest amounts of water and the strongest winds can create extreme rainfall and floods. And this is often done by them stalling out over watersheds that are already vulnerable to flooding. A well-known example of this that you may have heard of is Pineapple Express. So that's a strong atmospheric river that's capable of bringing moisture from the tropics near Hawaii over to the US western coast. However, not all atmospheric rivers cause damage. Most of them are weak systems that provide beneficial rain and snow that are also crucial to our water supply. So atmospheric rivers are a key feature in that global water cycle and are closely tied both to water supply and flood risks, particularly in the Western United States. If you do want to learn more about atmospheric rivers, NOAA has a ton of great information and resources, and there's a website listed up there on the top right, www.research.noaa.gov, and they have wonderful resources. So what is the impact from flooding? What is the risk? Despite frequent flooding in Sonoma County, most flooding doesn't present a significant threat to life. And that's due to weather and river forecasting, which provides us ample warning, as well as flood control measures from the Coyote and Warm Springs dams that help mitigate the effects of those heavy rains. Now, an associated danger to flooding may include debris flows, and these may be small, localized flows that can impede traffic, or they might be more significant debris flows that are a threat to life and property. And one of the most significant debris flows in recent history was the 1998 Rio Nito mudslide that destroyed 6 homes and forced the evacuation of 300 residents. Heavy rains can also cause smaller, more localized flooding. So this is usually due to either local terrain naturally being slow draining, or it may be due to temporary conditions such as clogged culverts or log jams. And while these can create hazardous situations, they usually don't trigger a large-scale disaster response throughout Sonoma County, as they're typically handled on that local level. Of course, physical damage from floods can come in a variety of forms. That can be inundation of structures, which cause water damage, not only to the contents inside, but the structural elements of that building. This can include erosion or scouring of stream banks, roadway embankments and foundations, impact damage to structures, including roads, bridges, culverts, and other features from that high velocity flow, and often the debris that's being carried by those floodwaters. This can also include the destruction of crops, the erosion of topsoil, the depositing of debris and sediment on croplands that typically isn't there, and the potential release of sewage and hazardous or toxic materials as wastewater treatment plants are inundated or storage tanks are damaged or pipelines are severed. And then of course, along with that damage comes the economic damage losses as well through the closures of businesses and other facilities, the disruption of communications, or the interruptions of provisions such as utilities like power, water, and sewer. And it's generally just the disruption of that normal function of a community. So in order to assess the risk in your area, there are some helpful tools that you may want to explore. The standard for floodplain management in the United States is to delineate and address flood risks within the area inundated by the 100-year flood, or what they call the base flood. And the 100-year flood is the equivalent of that 1% chance flood in any given year. So although the reoccurrence level is based on statistical averages, the actual occurrence of events is going to vary. You know, it could occur at shorter intervals or even within the same year. FEMA did prepare a flood insurance study for the County of Sonoma to identify and map the flood hazard areas. And you can see the 100-year flood zone map for the county. And it was developed for the county's hazard mitigation plan, which is on the left-hand side of the slide. And if you'd like to view this map in more detail, you can access it at permitsonoma.org, as well as the larger county's hazard mitigation plan. Now on the right-hand side, you can also use FEMA's Flood Map Service Center, where you can search by individual addresses or a place or coordinates, and it will display the flood hazard areas at that specific location with the different flood layers. And the county also hosts an interactive hazard mitigation plan on our website, which includes a hazard mapping tool. And this is another interactive map that allows you to select from multiple hazards across the county and view that hazard for a specific address or area. And you'll see in the screenshot there that there are multiple flood layers on there that you can view. There's the flood awareness area, the 1% annual flood chance flood, which is the same or the equivalent as a 47-foot flood stage for the Russian River, as well as the 0.2 annual chance flood, which is the equivalent of a 51-foot flood stage on the Russian River. So this is a part of a larger hazard story map, which includes this hazard mapping tool, an overview of all the hazards, and an overview of the plan. So you can not only view the flooding hazards, but all the other major hazards that impact us here in Sonoma County. And with that, I will wrap it up there. My contact information is listed here on the slide. If anyone would like to reach out, you know, flooding is a major hazard in our county, and it's also very nuanced for each jurisdiction and region and neighborhood. So I know this was a broad overview, but I do encourage you all to check out some of the resources shared. And of course, I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. So with that, I will stop sharing and pass it over to Dr. Nancy Brown, our Community Preparedness Manager.
Thank you, Sage. Hopefully you guys can hear me. And let me share my screen now. All right. Thank you so much, Sage. I learned quite a few things, and I did see somebody was wondering about some of those tools. So maybe while I'm talking, if you have a second, you can put the FEMA link and the other in the chat so people can copy it out at some point. So we are here to talk about wading through floods, and I'm going to talk about specifically preparedness tips. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And as we all know, we've seen just in these last few weeks how winter weather really packs things together, and we don't just get one hazard, we get multiple hazards layered on top of each other. We saw that we had power outages, we had extreme cold, we had high winds, we had trees falling, and of course, over and over again in January, we had the threat of water overtopping our waterways and potentially flooding. I am sure if you're like me, you learned a few things also in the last few weeks about maybe how preparedness can be improved upon, so that when you get to flood warnings and things like that, you have a really good opportunity to stay safe, keep your family safe, and stay out of the roads. I'm going to talk about a few different strategies and a few different preparedness tips, and I'd like to ask everybody to do just one thing for me, and that is I'd like you to, as I'm talking, see if you can see something that you think, oh, that's pretty easy, and if you find that thing, go ahead and do it today. This is how we get things moving in preparedness, is you just make a commitment to start with one thing, and then you move on from there. So I'll try to give you some tips that are pretty simple and that you should be able to easily do. Preparedness is really an all hazards type of thing, but when we talk about winter storms and flooding, we do need to have a winter focus to the thing. So staying informed is always important, but we also want you to be able to stay informed about weather. So this is really important in the winter, that you have ways that you can stay informed about how weather will affect you. We need to make sure that your kits are winter ready. We're going to talk about that a little bit also. And also that your plan includes evacuation routes that are appropriate for winter storms. So how do we stay informed? Of course, Misti's going to talk a little bit from the Sheriff's Department about alerts. We want to make sure that you're all signed up for alerts and warnings, so that we can reach into your home and say, hey, pay attention, something's going on. If you go to our SoCo emergency website, you will see that we have this page here, and it's that right now we have the freeze warning up. So anytime something is going on in the county that has potential for life-threatening situation, we always have that up on our SoCo emergency website with a place for you to click to get more information. If for some reason you are unable to reach the internet, if you call 211, they can also tell you what's happening. So we never want you to call 911 to ask, hey, am I in a flood zone? We want you to call 211. They have access to the same information at SoCo Emergency. They also sit within our Emergency Operations Center and get information very quickly. They have great resources for people who need help in a disaster as well. So if it's not life-threatening, call 211 with questions if you can't get to the internet and have your questions answered here. Also, I'm sure you all have just seen some information about the National Weather Service. They have lots of great information. So when you hear weather's coming down, if you tune into the Weather Service, they can give you a really deep dive into details, probably way more information than anybody needs if you go deep enough. But sometimes it's really interesting to see more about things like Sage was talking about, like what atmospheric rivers are and where they're going and what they're doing. So information is always power in a disaster. The more information you have, the more likely you are to be able to make really good decisions to keep yourself and your family safe. How many of you received a NOAA weather alert in January when we had those really heavy rains? If you have a NOAA weather radio, you can get alerts from the National Weather Service like we had in January. You can also get alerts from Sonoma County's Department of Emergency Management. If we predict life safety issues, we can send out an alert over that NOAA weather radio, which is another great way to stay informed. And then last on my list is your neighbors. So if you are somebody who knows that you are challenged with internet and other things and you might need help getting information, be sure to let your neighbors know that you would welcome them to knock on your door and let you know if they get an alert about something. Also, if you're somebody who knows that you have a neighbor who you think, you know, I bet they don't even use a computer over there. They don't seem like they're tech savvy. Be sure to let them know that you'll be happy to give them information. If you receive alerts and warnings, if you see something on the news that you think is important for them to consider, please go next door and let them know. Anytime, as we discussed, we have bad weather that could lead to flooding, it's very often hand in hand with power outages. We saw a lot of power outages. We had people in the county that were out of power for 7 and 10 days in January because of high winds and power lines going down and water and all of these other things. Be sure you have backup power for your devices. So backup batteries for your AM/FM radio, backup batteries for your NOAA weather radio, a standalone power charger for your cell phone so that you can be sure to stay informed and we can let you know what's going on. When we talk about kits, of course, your go bag, I'm sure all of you have a go bag. Everybody in Sonoma County knows how important it is to be ready to go at a moment's notice. But is your go bag ready for winter? Do you have some dry socks in there? Do you have a warm sweatshirt? Do you have some mittens? Think about your go bag in terms of cold weather. And maybe that's something you could do today is take a look at your go bag, make sure you've got stuff for cold weather in there. And then the shelter in place kits. And this is really important. And the reason this is really important, I just mentioned, we had a whole bunch of people who were out of power for 7, 8, 9, 10 days, which means that they couldn't cook. There was rain coming, there was a storm after storm after storm. So driving conditions were dangerous for weeks at a time. So it's really important that you have supplies for at least 7 days in your shelter in place kit, in addition to your go bag. If you add those two supplies together, that gives you 10 days of supplies in your home to keep yourself at home and safe instead of out on the road trying to gather what you need. Consider your shelter in place kits if the food that you have on hand is appropriate if you're unable to cook. So really think about, you know, is that something I would eat if I couldn't turn on the oven or if I couldn't microwave it? And maybe you need to make a few adjustments to some of the canned goods and things that you have so that you're ready to go at a moment's notice to stay home for at least 7 days if you need to and stay off the road. Minimizing travel means keeping yourself safe, and I think that's an important message. We also want to make sure that you know your zone. I'm sure all of you know that we have standardized evacuation zones in Sonoma County. If you have a new neighbor, do me a favor and walk over to them and make sure that they also know that they have a standardized zone. You can check out your zone if you don't know it at SoCo Emergency. It's also really important. In the fall, we have so many leaves coming down over and over again all over the place. Make sure that your rain gutters on your house, that your drains around your home, that your street drains, that all those things are as clear as possible at all times. So when the water comes down, it has somewhere to go. You can end up with flooding on streets that really shouldn't flood just because there's too much debris for the water to get out the way it was intended to. In yellow, please highlight here, do not use diesel generators or ovens or barbecues, any of those kinds of things inside your home, please. If you're utilizing a generator for backup power, your generator goes outside with a cord inside. You can't keep these things indoors. These things can lead to you being very, very sick and can also lead to people dying. So that's why I put that in yellow every single year. All across the nation, we have people who do this because they're cold. Make sure you have plenty of ways to stay warm in your home, but do not consider bringing your generator indoor or your barbecue indoor or opening up your oven to heat your house. These are not safe things. Everybody knows we need to keep our gas tank at least half full in the summertime, but you know what? You need to do that in the wintertime too for the same reason. When the power goes out, it's entirely possible that your gas stations that are local to you will be unable to let you pump gas because they won't have a backup system for you. So you want to make sure that if you need to leave your home, you are ready to go at any moment. And then last, I want you to take a look at your neighborhood. You know where you live. You've had a really good example in the last 30 days, how much water comes in your neighborhood. What roads you have that may get completely inundated just when there's a lot of heavy rain, and consider whether or not those are going to cut you off from the community and whether or not that's something that's acceptable to you. So take a look at your risk and prepare based on that, because we have really good examples. You have some great maps that Sage provided for you to really take a really good look at your risk and plan accordingly. These things do not have to cause you life safety issues if you keep informed and if you have a good plan that'll take care of you. So pets, here's what we know for sure from fire season is that you're not going to evacuate your home if you can't find your cat. So please, when you see that the weather is changing and there's a chance you may have to evacuate, make sure your pets are indoors because that's good for their health. But also make sure that they are in a place where you can capture and get them. So if they're really good at hiding, you may want to make sure you keep them in just one room so you know where they are so that you can grab them and put them in their carrier if you need to leave. And then, this particular webinar is sponsored by our COPE group in Northern Sonoma County. And I think it's really important, the work that COPE does, because what it's really doing is connecting neighbors together. So if you have neighbors that you know might need assistance, please let them know that you will be there to help them if their plan A and plan B fall through. And if you need assistance, please go next door to your neighbor and let them know, because if they know in advance, they're going to be much better at helping you and keeping the entire community safe. This is how we make sure everybody stays safe, is we connect at that neighbor to neighbor level, and that's really important. I have a great resource for you. Our evac packs have been super popular in the county. We've distributed about 25,000 of them in the last couple of years. That's what you see in the picture here. So it's a glassine pack. It has a personal preparedness plan. It has information on how to get through power outages. It has a checklist. You can pick up one of these at any of your Sonoma County library branches. They're in English and in Spanish. So if you haven't gotten some of this planning done yet, stop by your library tomorrow and pick one of these up and start planning now. As I mentioned, I'm going to give you a place where you can get more information, and that is at our SoCo emergency page. There's oodles and oodles of information there for you. So many things that you can learn about if you want to, or if you just want to check your go bag and make sure that you've got plenty of warm things in it today, that's a great place to start too. I am going to leave it there and stop sharing. And then I would like to introduce Misti from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department, who is going to take over from here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Nancy. Thanks everybody for having me. I work here at the Sheriff's Office. I'm the Community Engagement Liaison. And so what that means is on a day-to-day basis, I manage our community outreach unit. And during disasters like floods and fires, I co-lead the team that issues all of our public information. So our nixles, our evacuation orders, and all of our social media. The Sheriff's Office role during a flood or other disasters is evacuations. It's our job to get you out of harm's way. And when I say you, I mean people who live in unincorporated Sonoma County. So everything I'm talking about is about unincorporated Sonoma County, where we have jurisdiction and responsibility to help keep you safe. Floods are really different than fires for a couple reasons. They're really slow moving events, and they're very predictable, and we always have advance notice. So we here at the Sheriff's Office will usually find out that a flood is expected about 2 to 3 days in advance. What's nice about that is we have plenty of time to prepare. We have plenty of time to understand who's in harm's way and who needs to potentially receive an evacuation order. And so very simply put, we're looking at where is the threat going, and who's in harm's way. And that's how we decide how to conduct evacuation orders on a very simplistic level. Once we find out that a flood is expected, we work with our partners like Sage at Department of Emergency Management to, again, understand when the flood is going to be there, how severe it's going to be, and who's going to be impacted. So that way we can put out evacuation orders and warnings as necessary. So on the note of evacuation orders and warnings, there's really those two terms that you should be familiar with. Evacuation order is mandatory. So that is a legal order from the sheriff that you have to leave your home. An evacuation warning is optional, and it's more of a heads up. So we're letting you know that you could be subject to an evacuation order later on. Perhaps you could be in danger. It's kind of this is your heads up that something is going on. So you absolutely are not required to evacuate during an evacuation warning, but sometimes people do. Sometimes they choose to evacuate because they realize they could be in danger, and it's the best choice for them and their family. The other thing about floods that I really want to hit home with you guys tonight is the Sheriff's Office is going to issue evacuation orders for people who are going to flood, but not people who will be isolated. And I'm going to repeat that because this is really important. The Sheriff's Office would issue evacuation orders for people who will flood, but not people who will be isolated or cut off from services and cut off from the rest of the county. So again, what we're looking at is who's going to be in danger to get them out of harm's way. It's very possible, and this happens all the time, that you live higher up in elevation above a river. Your path, your roads to get in and out of your house get cut off by the water and you're stuck. Maybe you're stuck for a day, maybe you're stuck for a week. It really depends on how many storms are rolling through and how severe that is. So oftentimes what I hear from people is like, how do I know when to evacuate? The evacuation order is clear. When you've received the evacuation order, you need to pack up and leave. It's this other wiggly area of perhaps you're under an evacuation warning, or perhaps you'll be isolated. So I want to go through some of the issues that you could be facing and things for you to think about, so you can make good decisions for yourself and your family. When you're isolated or functionally cut off, you can't get out to get supplies. So if you run out of medicine, you can't go to the pharmacy. If you run out of food, you can't go to the grocery store. Hopefully you have your shelter in place kit ready, as Nancy already talked about, but life happens sometimes. Things happen that we don't necessarily anticipate. Conversely, if you can't get out, we can't get in to help you. So we always, as first responders, we will do whatever it takes to get to you when you call 911. The Sheriff's Office has a Marine unit with boats. We have Henry 1, which is our helicopter. We have a lot of options to reach you. We absolutely will not get there as fast because we can't, because the roads are blocked. And it may be very, very difficult to reach you if we can reach you at all. So if you have a medical emergency or you need some sort of help, it's much more difficult to receive services from first responders. You also might be experiencing power outages and cell phone outages as well. So you could be losing access to that critical information, and losing power could be, inconvenient at best, but it can be really problematic at worst. If you have medical equipment that relies on power, even as something as simple as a CPAP machine for sleep apnea, you could be coming up against real issues with not having power. So those are some things to think about when you're deciding whether or not you should evacuate. Think about some of those potential risks. Think about what you need and what your family and your household needs, and then make a decision from there. If you do decide to evacuate, or you're considering whether or not you should, remember too that exit routes might become blocked. Water isn't the only hazard. Sage mentioned the mudslides out in Monterey. You can have power lines down, you can have trees down. There's different reasons why your exit route or exit routes might become blocked and you might not be able to get out later on. So just things to think about. How will you know if you're under evacuation order or warning? We will tell you. The two biggest things that you can do tonight are sign up for Nixle and sign up for SoCo Alert. Nixle is the system the Sheriff's Office uses to send you your evacuation orders and warnings, and SoCo Alert is the system that our partners over at Department of Emergency Management use. So please make sure you are signed up for both of those, so you'll be sure to get the information. We also have a couple of other tools. We have deputies that are boots on the ground, going door to door. Our partners at Department of Emergency Management might use a NOAA weather radio or reverse 911, something along those lines. So there's lots of different ways to get a hold of you. That's usually how you'll find out. And Nancy talked about knowledge is power, and I think that's really, really critical. When you find out what's actually going on, it reduces your stress level and it helps you make good decisions for yourself and for your family. So I've got up on the slide here a few of my favorite resources that I use both as a resident along the Russian River and then also as a Sheriff's Office employee. And the first is socoemergency.org, which Nancy went over because that has your evacuation map and a lot of good, detailed information about, where's it going to flood, where are the shelters, where can I bring my horse, things of that nature. The second website I really like is NOAA. I've got the link on the screen here. That tells you the current level water conditions along the Russian River. It tells you what the projected levels are, and it also gives you a history. And most importantly, it gives you context. So if you hear that the Russian River is going to flood at 26 feet in Healdsburg, that doesn't have a lot of meaning for most people. What's nice about NOAA is it will list the different elevations of the flood elevations, and it will give you examples of what starts to flood at that elevation. So you can really start to put the pieces together and understand at certain flood elevations along the river, this is what it means. And that can help you make better decisions too, and really understand what the impact is going to be to your home or to your property or to your exit routes. Sage also, I think Sage and Nancy both mentioned the National Weather Service. You can follow them on social media. They're great. They put out a ton of information. You can also find them online. And they're the ones who will tell us that a big storm is coming, that flooding is expected. We get all of our information from them in the emergency services world, and you have access to all the same information as well. Make sure you follow the Sheriff's Office on social media and the County of Sonoma as well. As these things are happening, as floods occur, we put out copies of our evacuation orders, and we put out a lot of situational awareness type posts to help you sort of see what's going on out in the world without you ever actually having to leave, or if you are evacuated, so you can see what's happening while you're gone. And then, of course, we've got a website that has more information for some evacuation resources as well. So kind of with all of these things that we've talked about tonight, there are a few big picture tips that come to mind for me. The first, as Nancy mentioned, is have a plan. So know where you're going to evacuate, know how you're going to get there, know who you're going to bring, including your pets. Start to build your situational awareness right now. Find those resources of reliable, accurate information and bookmark them in your browser or save them on your social media, because those sites are going to become invaluable when you hear that a flood is coming. Look to those resources so you can start to build your knowledge. Again, it'll reduce your stress level. It'll help you make good decisions for yourself and for your family. We always recommend that you leave early. Again, since a flood is such a slow moving event, you're going to have time. When we put out an evacuation order, we're putting it out with enough advance notice that you'll be able to get out before the flooding starts. So don't wait until the last second to try to, see how long you can stay or see how bad it gets. Make sure you leave early so that way you don't have to worry about roads closing or traffic or anything else like that. And please, I know we've said this a lot over the past month or so, turn around, don't drown. Don't ever drive through standing water. It's really, really easy to have your car get swept away. And I think you probably all heard that sadly we did lose somebody this year because she drove into a flooded street and she didn't make it. So turn around, don't drown as you're evacuating. I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I'm going to pass it off to Diana, and I'll be available for questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage, Nancy, and Misty. So now we're into the question and answer period. I'm going to start with some questions that were submitted when people registered. But as a reminder, please put your questions in the chat, and either, we will verbally answer those, or Priscilla and some of the other people have been answering questions as we go along. So the first question I have here is, how do I find out where shelters are before I evacuate, and what services will be available?
I can take that one. So at SoCo Emergency, you can find out where the shelters are. There is a page on the emergency tab that will tell you where shelters are opening. Starting with the fires, we had started the process of a temporary evacuation point, where when we have evacuation orders, we have a safe place for you to go if we don't have a shelter open. That's not as prevalent during a flood because we do have that ramp up time that allows us to have an opportunity to get a shelter open. We had a shelter open 2 days before the overtopping was predicted this year with the flooding. So super helpful to be able to get that advance warning in a flood scenario. But the information on where those shelters will be. Also at the shelters, we do have complete assistance for people. So if you are picking up your neighbor and you're going to drop them off at the shelter on your way to your cousin's house in San Francisco, please feel safe by leaving them there. We're going to have, we have medical help, we have ADA compliant beds, we have other types of services. Our beautiful partners at COAD, which is Community Organizations Active in Disaster, help staff those shelters with people who can assist people with other types of needs that they might have. All of our shelters are completely bilingual. So if you have a neighbor who doesn't have English as their first language and they'd like to go to the shelter, they're certainly welcome. At the shelter, we do provide a warm and safe place. We also, of course, provide food each day for the people. And if you need something else when you're at the shelter, you really have only to ask, and we'll do our very best to help.
Can I just follow up on that real quickly, Nancy? SoCoemergency.org is the website, and it's awesome. It has a lot of information. If you don't have access to internet, the alternative is to call 211. Nancy, you touched on that earlier in your presentation. I just want to throw it out there as a reminder. They have professionally trained call takers to help guide you to the closest shelter.
Thank you. The next question is, where do I go to find road closures, including highways, counties, and city roads?
I can take that
So-
one.
Go ahead. Yeah, do it, Sage.
You can help me if I miss anything, but typically when an event like this is happening, for example, the last few weeks, beginning of January, also on socoemergency.org, our county team, our GIS team, creates what we call a winter weather map. And this map is pulling all the information we have, for example, with road closures, into one central location, one map that's updated consistently on that website.
Now, this does, just for your information, if you live in an incorporated city, you're probably going to have to check with your city for road closures that are actually in the city. The county data provides county area as well as our state partners. So the freeway system is also included in that. But if you live in the city of Santa Rosa, you need to go to the city of Santa Rosa's website to take a look at their road closures. Unfortunately, it's very difficult work because things are moving fast. So it's always really good to really understand your own exit routes in advance, because you may not be able to get that information as quick as you need it on what roads might be closed. So it's really important that you take a look in advance of roads that and alternatives for yourself as well, because that information may not be up yet when you're ready to go.
How do I report down trees?
So if the tree is on a power line, you need to call 911 because that's a life safety issue. If the tree is on a street, you can call our permanent Sonoma folks. You can call if it's on private property. That would not be necessarily a life safety issue. If it's on a street and it feels like a life safety issue, then please call 911 also. But if it's just a tree down and somebody needs to move it, Permit Sonoma can provide information for you on that. And on our website, there is a place where you can report down trees and things like that. Do you know exactly where, Sage?
No, I'm trying to pull it up. There's a road maintenance number that you can call to report it. I can put that in the chat once I find it, but yeah.
Thank you. During the last floods, it was not easy to know where to find sandbags. Is there one place we can go to see if there's a location where we live?
So again, SoCo Emergency definitely has that information. And as Misti mentioned, information that we post at SoCo Emergency and that we have press releases about, 211 also has that information for you. So if you can't access the internet and you need sandbags, if you call 211, they can also let you know where you can find sandbags. We try to gather that information when there's an emergency going on. For those of you who don't know, we have pretty regular calls for the entire county, all hops on a phone call. So people from the cities, people from all over hop on a phone call, and we gather information about what's going on all over. So our public information team is also there gathering that information. So as sandbags become available at different places, we get that posted up on SoCo Emergency as soon as we know that.
Thank you. What triggers opening up an OES?
I'm sorry, I may have missed that. I was looking for the road division. Could you repeat it?
What triggers opening up an OES?
I think you mean an EOC. So the an emergency operations.
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there aren't one set of triggers that will lead to us activating the Emergency Operations Center. It can really be a variety depending on the situation. Sometimes it's that local jurisdictions are activating. For example, our cities, if multiple cities are facing local emergencies, we will activate in support of them as well. But it's also for the unincorporated area. If there are multiple hazards going on that we need to address, that could lead to an activation. And there's also different levels of activation. It can be a smaller activation where we just have some key staff in there to do some essential work, or it can be a full-scale activation like you would see, for example, in a wildfire scenario.
I wish to be notified if my area is in imminent danger of flooding. It's not a question, but if that can be addressed.
Yeah, I can take that one. If your property is in imminent danger of flooding, and it's something we know about, we know that it's going to happen, as we typically do, then you're going to get an evacuation order from the sheriff's office if you live in unincorporated Sonoma County. So the best way to make sure that you're notified of that is to sign up for Nixle and sign up for SoCo Alert. Sign up for both of those things. And the reason it's really important is because we can get a hold of you in different ways. So SoCo Alert, they can call you, they can email you, etc. Nixle is just a text message, which is helpful, but it's, you know, 2 ways to be notified is better than 1 way, right? We don't want to miss you. It's a really important thing. What we did this last flooding out in the river is we knew that some properties were going to flood a little bit, and we didn't issue an evacuation order because it wasn't enough that it was a threat to life safety. So in Guerneville in particular, there were a couple places where it was like just barely flooding. It's certainly inconvenient. It's certainly not fun, but people weren't in danger. So we didn't issue an evacuation order. So what I would also recommend doing is going to the NOAA website, which possibly, I think somebody put it in the chat. Thanks, Sage. Because that tells you, you can find the station, the monitoring station on the river that's closest to where you live, and you can see what the current river levels are, and you can see what the projected river levels are. From there, if you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, you can see what those river levels mean, what areas start to flood. So it'll say, you know, Guerneville at 32 feet, that's flood stage. This is what you'll start to see at 33 feet, at 34 feet, at 35 feet. Same thing up in Healdsburg along the river as well. So that's what really gives you that context and can help you understand whether or not your property might be subjected to even minor flooding. So I'd recommend looking at that as well.
And that leads into the next question. How can I find out the elevation of my property?
If you go on, so it's not an easy answer because most of the elevation maps are not detailed enough to necessarily show your personal home. They're going to be showing the general area. So if you look at some of the elevation maps, even Google tries to do a job with some elevation, but the topographical model that they utilize shows you 100 feet. That's not as helpful when we're talking about 35 feet and 40 feet. We might have to follow up with the COPE group on that and have them get it out in a COPE newsletter, because I'm not 100% sure how we'd find that in detail for people. Certainly the hazard mitigation map will give you some information on if you're in the flood zone, but what your actual number is, what your actual elevation number is. I don't think you'd find that there. You'd just find out whether or not your address is in a flood zone, a major flood zone or a minor flood zone or a predicted flood zone of 1% and those types of things. Do you have more to add, Sage?
I was just going to add, I believe, and once again, I don't know if it will be as granular as your specific property, but USGS, I think, also has an interactive map that is topographical and provides more detail than you're going to find, for example, on Google Maps or something like that. And so that may be your best bet to at least start.
Some of the questions that were submitted had to do with waterways, which our speakers here really are, it's not their expertise, but in our next webinar about floods, we will look into having maybe someone from the water agency here to address, you know, blockages on streams and different things like that. So are there any questions in, let me look to see if anyone has don't see any more questions there. Do the speakers have anything they want to add while I look through the chat?
I do see here that Phil has a follow-up on elevations of individual properties. He says the county needs to publish detailed local maps of flood levels, submerged local evacuation routes. And that's certainly something I'd be happy to take back to our GS GIS team as a suggestion. Thank you for that. So I think we've answered all the questions.
I think we have. So then I will turn this over to Elsa, who will explain to you what COPE Northern Sonoma County is and how we have resources that can help you and your neighbors prepare for wildfires, floods, earthquakes, and more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elsa, and I'm the new community outreach specialist for COPE. So this is a quick presentation for those who are not as familiar with COPE to learn what it is and how we can help you and your neighbors be better prepared. So our mission is to help residents, families, visitors, and neighbors become and remain better prepared to respond to and recover from emergency situations. What we do. So COPE is based on a neighbors helping neighbors mentality. COPE started in 2002 in Oakmont, and it has spread out throughout the county. COPE Northern Sonoma County is under District 4. So you would be working with different local fire agencies and other Sonoma County agencies like Sonoma County Department of Emergency Management, which Nancy is a part of. Northern Sonoma County Fire Protection District, we have Chief Marshall Turbeville with us right now. Sonoma County Fire District and CAL FIRE. And what you would be doing is you would create your COPE community and you would work with these local fire agencies and prepare emergency preparedness education, emergency communication plans, evacuation plans, and also you could plan for vegetation removal and or grazing. But basically the purpose of it all is to be able to help each other when you don't have anyone else to talk to. So we have over 45 groups and about 4,000 members in our district. You can see all the different areas that we cover in this map. And this is our board, and we have our chair, Priscilla Abercrombie, with us, who said hi to you all in the beginning. Priscilla has been instrumental in the growth of COPE NoSoCo, and she has helped us take it from being an organization to a nonprofit. So you can find us on social media. We have COPE Northern Sonoma County Facebook, and then we have COPE Northern Sonoma County YouTube. You can find this video later. We are recording it for you to watch whenever you want at our YouTube channel. And we're also on Nextdoor as COPE Northern Sonoma County. When you go to our website, which is northernsonomacounty.org, you can watch the story of how COPE got started, and we have Margie Hanselman, who's part of Northeast Geyserville COPE. We have more webinars coming up. We have one in April, which will be covering earthquake preparedness. We have one in July that will be covering wildfire preparedness, and one in October, and the topic is to be determined. So you can go onto our website and sign up for our newsletter. And you can also join us on our info sessions, which are the third Tuesday of every month at 3:30 p.m. That's for anyone that wants to learn more, has any questions, and would like to create their own COPE community. And you can register on the website for our newsletter. And we're happy to see you here. And we hope that you join us again for our next webinar.
So we actually have a couple minutes left, and there was a question that came up. So maybe we'll take an answer. They wanted to know if they evacuate, what should they do with their house?
I can start on that a little bit. Thank you, Heather, for the question. So from the sheriff's office side, really what we're worried about is first your safety and secondarily the safety of your property. Those are our two missions. So if you've already evacuated and it's during a fire, we appreciate if the gate is left open because it's easier to check to see if you've evacuated. And I know firefighters, it makes it easier for firefighters to get on the property too if they need to stage or fight fires or see if there's a water source or something along those lines. So if you feel comfortable, please do leave your gate open. Please do leave your house locked. Because of course we have heavy security during fires, but we also want to make sure that your house isn't an easy target for people if people are going to try to loot. So keep your house locked. During a flood, you know, from a sheriff's office perspective, just lock your doors and leave from there. I don't have anything beyond that. I'm not sure, Nancy or Sage, if you had more specific responses with regards to, looks like Heather's questions were about like, do you turn off the water? Do you turn off the power? Things like that. I'm not sure if you guys have any feedback for Heather.
Yeah, typically none of those things are really necessary when we're talking about evacuating due to flood. Of course, if you have one of those handy evacuated tags, be sure to put that on as you leave so that the sheriff doesn't have to bang on your door to see if you left yet. But yeah, a lot of those types of things that we recommend in fire season are a little bit different from a flood because nobody's going to really be going in to defend your home. We can't defend your home from water. It is what it is. If you've collected sandbags, of course, you want to leave those around your garage door and your front door to try to keep water from seeping into your home if you can.
I would also just add to, hopefully this is on your website, so co-emergency, but there are things that I've heard firefighters talk about for making your home more defensible, like, you know, pulling the curtains off, you know, pulling the curtains away from the windows and making sure that there's nothing flammable against your house and things of that nature. So I don't know if that's on socoemergency.org, ladies, or if it's maybe on the local fire department website, but for a fire, that would be helpful. I did also want to mention that the sheriff's office lets you register your gate code. So if you have a gate and it's locked with a code, we ask pretty please, if you'd like to share your code with us, we will keep it secure in our CAD system here with dispatch. So only dispatchers and Redcom dispatchers would have it. And they do fire and medical. And what that does is it allows our deputies or, you know, fire and ambulance to get into your property more quickly. So if your gate is shut and locked and you call 911, or if it's shut and locked and we're doing an evacuation for especially something like a fire, it allows the deputy in the field to call dispatch, get the code, enter the code, and get into your property quickly. So it also prevents the deputy from potentially damaging your gate as he or she is trying to get in there to try to get you out of there.
I do have one more question now that Chief Tuberville is here with us. What do I do if I get trapped in my car in a flood or trapped in my house?
Okay, I'll answer the one about the car first. And there's videos if you want to, you know, Google and get more information. But the problem with a person being in a vehicle is once the water gets up to a certain point, it's going to be very hard for you to open your door because you're basically pushing against water. So the sooner you can get out, the better. Obviously, if it's very fast moving water, that's a different situation as well, which we can talk about. But if we're just talking about flood water, which isn't moving rapidly, you want to be able to get that door open or get your window down before the water reaches that level. I know this may sound uncomfortable to you, but you're already in a bad situation and it's only going to get worse if your car gets submerged. So you need to somehow find a way to get out of your vehicle, opening your door as soon as you can, if you can, rolling down your window, as long as you have power and electricity, you know, or to your windows. Once you get to the point that you can't roll your window down, you're going to be forced then to break a window to get out. And now you're working against that same water pressure as well as the structure of the window. So your front windshield, that can be pushed out. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's a different type of glass than your other windows. Most windows will break if you hit them hard enough, especially with a pointed type object. There is tools you can, you know, purchase specifically for this, but you're basically going to want to use your feet to break out one of your windows. And the sooner you do it, the better. Worst case, you're going to end up in your vehicle trapped with only a limited amount of air wherever an air pocket forms. So I know this may not sound comfortable, but you're making the best of already a bad situation. So do whatever you can to prevent getting in the situation. But the big thing is to get out of your vehicle and then try to get to a high point so you don't get too cold, hypothermia, and you're seen. In a house, kind of the same principle. You know, the sooner, if you can, get out. If we're talking about a real bad situation where you can't get out, the water's rising. That's going to also, you know, be a very bad situation. So this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation as well. You want to get to the highest point. So, you know, get to your roof, attic, second story window, that type of situation, call for help as soon as possible. The worst possible situation is your house starts floating away. So that there's almost, that's a bad situation. But otherwise, try to get to the highest point, or a helicopter can find you, a firefighter in a boat can find you. And ideally you can call for help, but calling for help on a cell phones may not work, or maybe the telephone lines are down. So your number one thing is to keep yourself dry and in a safe location. So both of these are very dynamic situations. So number one, let's do our best to prevent it from happening. And then just realize you got to think quickly, think about the stuff ahead of time, do research on your own by looking at some online references. There's a lot of good videos out there. And then just know at some point, you only got a couple options left, and none of those are real favorable things. But you want to keep air so you can breathe, and stay warm as best you can, and be seen for the first responders. Many times it's going to be a helicopter or a boat that's going to have to make access to you. So I'm hopefully answered that question. And thanks you guys all for attending tonight as well.
Thank you, Marshall. Well, that is the end of our webinar, and we thank you for attending, and we hope to see you in the April one for earthquakes and the July one for wildfires. If you have any questions about anything that happened here, they have put our speakers' contact information in the chat. Also, you can contact us at our general information, contact@copenorthernsonomacounty.org. So thank you and have a pleasant night.